Today I have another unusual tardigrade moment to share with you. I'll also be taking a quick look at tardigrade reproduction as well, but this interaction involves a tardigrade and a protist. I'm going to call it unusual tardigrade death too. I didn't quite see the death occur, but I think it was unavoidable, unfortunately. So let's take a look at it. So here is our tardigrade. You can see it's nice and active. But you'll notice there's this cloud around the head near the mouth, and we know from the previous video that that's a bad sign. It's likely to be the body fluid leaking out. You can also see in the lower left, near the last pair of legs, there's something moving. It's spinning around there, and that is a protist. It's likely to be Didinium or something similar, and Didinium is a carnivorous ciliate protist with a voracious appetite. So how do we know that this is a protist and not a tardigrade egg? In this situation, it's a bit confusing. It does look a lot like an egg. So let's talk about tardigrade reproduction. Females will produce a number of eggs and either discard them in their cuticle when they molt, or they can lay them freely in their environment. Here is a beautiful female with 6 eggs. You can see the eggs are carried high above the stomach and towards the posterior. And they're usually quite large, although some tardigrades will have smaller eggs too. And they can even be ornamented with spikes or tufts on them. The shape of the eggs is often used to identify a species. And this is a female emerging from her molted cuticle. She has left these eggs behind to develop further. They'll be protected until they're ready to emerge. And this is one of my favourite moments from the last year of looking at tardigrades. It's just beautiful. This is a Milnesium. You can see by the long claws and the oral papillae, which I like to call the mouth flower. And just for fun, this is a baby Milnesium, only 1 day old. It's just lovely. But back to the protist, we know it's not an egg because it's in the wrong place and it's spinning around rapidly. That kind of movement is typical of a ciliate. And tardigrade eggs can move, but they don't spin around very fast. So here's a well-developed egg, and it's moving very slightly, but it's kind of hard to make out. And by the time the egg is developed enough to move, we should be able to see the tardigrade's stylets or its claws. So after looking at tardigrade eggs, we can be sure that this is a protist. But how did it get in? You can often see protists in discarded molts or feeding on dead organisms, and this one looks like it's inside a rotiphilorica, and it's slowly reproducing through binary fission, which is a form of asexual reproduction. You can see it doubling and splitting. So protists like Didinium are sometimes found inside a discarded molt or feeding on a dead microanimal. But why is this one inside a living tardigrade? I wish I knew because I just haven't seen this before. But my guesses are that either the tardigrade tried to eat the protist and it pushed its way further into the body, or maybe the protist forced its way in through the mouth to feed on the tardigrade cells. But we can see that the mouth is probably the point of injury because there's this cloud of hemolymph around it. So what's going to happen now? Over time, the tardigrade was moving less and mostly staying on its side. It already seemed to be impacted by the protist. So I think that either the protist would keep feeding on its cells, and maybe even multiplying like we saw before, until the tardigrade died, or the protist would force its way out. And like we saw last time, once the cuticle is breached, then body fluids leak out uncontrollably. So either way, I think it would die. And this is the likely result. So this is a dead tardigrade that I actually found in the same moss and water sample. There are a lot of protists in there, and we know this is a dead tardigrade and not a molt because we can see the pharyngeal bulb and some cells and muscles are still present. And I would normally assume that the tardigrade has died naturally and the protist came along later to feed on it, but now that we've seen a protist inside a living tardigrade, it's hard to know. So that was a pretty strange event. Let me know what you think about it. Unfortunately, it wasn't looking good for our tardigrade there. The microscopic world can be pretty rough, and even something that seems fairly harmless like a protist can sometimes cause some bad damage. So these couple of videos have been a little bit sad, but next time I'm going to be looking at a tardigrade from a creek, and it seems to have some unusual stomach contents. But this time I promise the tardigrade is going to be okay. So thanks for watching and see you next time.